Skeeters round here.
Skeeters.
Skeeters by the dozen.
Welcome back everyone, and welcome back Billy here. It's been a while since you stole the limelight from me, so it's good to have you with us. Today we're heading to a church which is looked after by the Church's Conservation Trust. It's called All Saints Church in the village of Idmiston in Wiltshire. The thing that's really unique about this church is inside there are loads of amazing memorials and also plenty of rather grotesque carved heads. And if that isn't a subject for a YouTube video, then frankly, I don't know what is. Sunshine, English countryside and good company. With brother Billy joining me as cameraman and occasional guitarist, I knew it was going to be a good day. Today we weren't going far. 6 miles northeast of Salisbury, I'd been given permission by the Church's Conservation Trust to film at All Saints in Idmiston, a 12th century church in the heart of the beautiful Bourne Valley here in Wiltshire. Though the parish retains its rustic charm, it's now home to one of the world's most secretive scientific laboratories. So here we are in the village of Idmiston, which looks fantastic on this bright sunny day. Have you noticed that, Guinea, every time you come it's really sunny and every time I go it's raining? So it bodes well for this trip because the church looks amazing. You can never ask for more when the weather is like this. You'd be forgiven for thinking that this is a normal English village. But behind us, Church Road leads directly to the entrance of Porton Down, the UK's top secret defence science laboratory. We couldn't take photos, of course, but the history is fascinating. Initially, it was used for testing chemical weapons, but it's become renowned as a centre for investigating viruses and bacteria, as well as other deadly substances. When a former Russian spy was poisoned in Salisbury in 2018, Porton Down identified the nerve agent used as Novichok. Unimaginable when you look at this glorious village scenery, and thankfully the church is more welcoming, but it has its own story to tell. You wouldn't believe that a building as well kept as this one has been redundant for nearly half a century, when it was taken over by the Church's Conservation Trust. Like the Friends of Friendless Churches, the charity looks after historic buildings at risk and protects them for the local community to enjoy. Much colder in here. Welcome to All Saints Church in Idmiston, an absolutely splendidly haunting building. Parts of this church go back to the 12th century, like the buttresses of this huge tower. It was restored by the Victorians though. The spire dates from 1867, during the restoration made by J.L. Pearson, the architect of Truro Cathedral, and Ewan Christian, the designer of the National Portrait Gallery. Apparently the old tower collapsed during the restoration work, but fortunately the church retains much of its ancient charm, and sometimes it feels like history is staring us in the face. From the outside the church looks fairly unassuming, but once you come in you can see the amazing architectural features. In particular there are 37 corbels, carved as heads. Some date to the 12th, the 13th and the 14th centuries. You can tell by the styles of their dress and their hair. And a lot of them are said to be based on local people, such as this chap, who is apparently based on the Lord of the Manor. But there's more to this church than local history. Stepping into the chancel, we find ourselves surrounded by memorials to the Bowl family, and one of these is particularly special. Reverend John Bowl, vicar of Idmiston until his death in 1788, is famous for producing the first ever scholarly edition of Don Quixote. Though his efforts were largely unappreciated at the time, Don Quixote has since become one of the world's most translated novels. Perhaps a Spanish flavour to today's programme, but not until we've investigated the organ. Let me introduce you to the pipe organ of All Saints Church, Idmiston, here in the darkest part of the church. Like most villages, we just have one keyboard here, because these instruments were really designed to accompany hymns. Normally you'd have a full-size pedal board, but this one actually only has a few dinky pedals, and all that they do is couple down this lowest section of the keyboard. So you can actually use the organ perfectly without the pedals at all. In fact, they're so small that if you're wearing shoes, as you would normally to play a pipe organ, they're almost unplayable. Before I switch it on, we can see there's a board on, which is a low bass pipe. Billy, why don't you come round to the side and show everybody the bass pipes, which are made of wood here. They look really good condition, don't they? Nice ones. So these are the board-on pipes, so you can hear them huffing away down low. Next to them, on the front, is the open diapason. It's the chunkiest organ stop, and it generally is the most reliable when an organ's going out of tune. Let's switch it on. So this looks like a really charming instrument. So let's start with the dulciana, the sweet sound. It sounds like strings. And then the flute sound, the stop diapason. Next up, open diapason, these big pipes. And then you add the principal and it just makes it louder. The flute is a soft version. And then finally the board-on works with other stops to make a bass sound. It's a bit out of tune, that one. Yeah, that's not good, that, see. It's not as versatile as an organ with two keyboards, but it's certainly perfect for this church for accompanying hymns. That was the Welsh hymn tune Hyfrydol, which means pleasant or delightful. It was composed by Roland Pritchard before he was 20 years old. Speaking of delightful and pleasant, the two stops I used there were the open diapason and the stopped diapason. Why? Because they're the most reliable stops when the organ's going out of tune. You'll have noticed that I didn't really pay too much attention to the other stops. You just wouldn't want to hear them. In a cathedral, the organs are tuned once a month. It involves slight adjustments in the collars at the top of the pipes or adjusting the reeds. It just keeps everything sounding cohesive and sweet. The problem is in redundant churches like this one where the organ isn't really used. To be honest, people probably don't realise that it needs to be tuned, and also organisations like the Church's Conservation Trust have bigger problems such as the structural integrity of the building than to tune the instruments, so that leaves me with few options when it comes to organs like this one. In other words, I need to call upon another instrument. And what better place than St Martin's Church in Salisbury, which is a fantastic mechanical organ, built in 1869. There's nothing electrified about it apart from the blower. Everything is done by hand. To change a sound, you have to pull a stop out or push a stop in. So the organist does a lot more than just playing with their hands and their feet. Let me play you something which encapsulates the way I feel when I go inside these village churches. I look in awe at these huge grand towers, but I also think of the more intimate parts of the churches, even the forgotten parts, the emotional parts. When you see those carved heads on the wall, yes, they are slightly spooky, but they're also symbols of a past which has been forgotten. They're literally faces of people who died hundreds of years ago. And we need some music which has the depth and the gravitas to reflect that. So how about J.S. Bach? This is a piece from the Well-Tempered Clavier. It's normally played on the piano, but you know, it sounds incredible on the organ, and it kind of reminds me of the St. Matthew Passion. It's Bach's Prelude in B-flat minor. the raw power of St. Martin's Church organ with Bach's prelude in B-flat minor. You might find it unusual to hear that on an organ if you're used to hearing it on a piano, but of course Bach didn't write it for a piano either because they hadn't been invented, so all the pianists are getting it wrong as well. That's the great thing about Bach's music. There are so few directions as to how it should be played that there is a huge amount of interpretation that can happen by the performer, and I love that because I think the performance and the way a piece is played is what separates different musicians. Otherwise it all sounds exactly the same. Speaking of different musicians, my brother Billy also came with me on this trip. His function here was to help me out. He didn't perform a solo. I wanted to write a piece for Idmiston Church, which again was inspired by this specific building. So we need something with a Spanish flavour. So I started writing a piece with Billy's help on the old organ at Idmiston Church, and he played the guitar. He picked out the tune. The balance is notoriously difficult between these two instruments in a small parish church because the organ is at one end and the guitar's at the other end. So it's extremely hard to stay in time and also to get the right volume. So we started with one melancholy theme, which sounds like this. And I contrasted that theme with something more expressive and more nostalgic even, in the style of a Spanish romance. So I took it home, worked on it and arranged it for pipe organ, and here it is from St. Martin's Church, the Spanish Romance. the Spanish Romance for organ, inspired by All Saints Church in Idmiston. That brings this video to its close. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've enjoyed that wonderful church. It's no longer redundant so long as you're coming with me. Next week I'm going to a place called Boscombe, which is also Ministry of Defence territory. It's actually the next door village to Idmiston. And after that, Billy and I will be going off further afield to look at a range of amazing churches we've been given permission to film at. You'll also be seeing Billy's car on the next episode. I'm sure you'll love seeing that. I'm slightly scared of getting a ride with him, but it will be handy having a driver so that I can hold the camera and talk while we're on our way. But until then, enjoy your week.